When Elijah felt the cold, bony hand wrap around his ankle, he screamed. He started jumping up and down as Frosty and Calvin ran over to help. They started stomping on the hand that grabbed hold of Elijah. Finally, the hand let go and the three of them ran out of the opening of the cave. The light on the other side was blinding, but they didn't care. They had made it. They continued walking out of the cave into the open air, gasping for breath. And as they looked around, they realized that they were back in Elijah and Calvin's neighborhood. But something was different. The trees were wilted and the sky was dark, and the snow looked a lot more dirty than it did before. "Something's not right here," Calvin said. Suddenly, they heard a loud roar in the distance. It was coming from the direction of Elijah and Calvin's houses, because they lived across the street from each other after all. They started running toward the sound, hoping to find some answers, as Frosty was struggling to keep up with them. But as they got closer, they realized with horror that the roar was coming from a giant monster that was standing in the middle of the road as it started stomping straight toward them. Frosty said, "Boys, this is not good." And as the monster approached, it lifted its huge arms way up high into the sky. Elijah, Calvin, and Frosty all thought it was about to slam its fist down and crush them all. But instead, the monster slowly lowered his hands and laid them on the ground right in front of them. It was almost like the monster wanted Elijah and Calvin to climb up into its hands or something. And that's when they realized that this monster was actually a protector who was sent from the ice world to protect Elijah and Calvin from the Ice Queen. It was only there because it knew the Ice Queen was following the boys and that they were in trouble. Someone from the ice world must have been watching out for them and sent the monster to protect them. And then all of a sudden, Elijah and Calvin heard that familiar, wicked-sounding laugh as they whipped their heads around and saw the Ice Queen standing in the distance with an evil grin, staring right at them. "We have to stop her," Elijah said. Calvin and Frosty nodded in agreement, and they ran toward the Ice Queen. But she was too powerful, and her ice spells were too strong. The Ice Queen raised her wand and summoned a huge hailstorm, and the hail pelted the two boys like little rocks falling from the sky, and the hail hurt so bad they had to go hide underneath a tree. But then they looked and saw that Frosty was just fine, because hail is just little pieces of ice that fall from the sky, and Frosty was already made of snow. It didn't bother him one bit. Frosty walked toward the Ice Queen and said, "You don't belong here. You leave these boys alone and go back to the dark place that you came from." The Ice Queen just laughed and pushed Frosty over. And just when it seemed like they were about to be defeated by the Ice Queen, the monster stepped forward. It let out a deafening roar, and its body began to glow with a bright white light. And the Ice Queen tried to shoot her magic spells at the monster, but they seemed to just bounce right off of its skin. And it charged towards her with all of its might. And as the battle raged on, Elijah, Calvin, and Frosty looked at what was happening, amazed at what was going on in front of them. And they realized that the monster wasn't really a monster at all. He was a protector of their world. He was a hero. And then Elijah remembered the hill where he slid down on his sled and was transported to the ice world in the first place. He said, "Hey, Calvin, I think I have an idea." Elijah and Calvin ran out from behind the tree with his sled, and Elijah said, "Hey, Ice Queen, are you looking for us?" And they started running toward the hill. The Ice Queen stopped fighting with the monster and began chasing after the two boys. And when they finally made it to the hill, Elijah threw his sled on the ground. But he didn't know how to get the Ice Queen to actually get on that sled and go over the jump at the bottom to take her back to the ice world. What were they going to do? And then they looked up and saw that the hero monster had followed them there. And the Ice Queen didn't realize the monster was standing right behind her. And the monster picked up the Ice Queen and he jumped on the sled with one foot. Because of course the monster was so big, the sled was more like an ice skate for him. And he slid down the hill on one foot while holding the Ice Queen in his hand. And all the while they could hear the Ice Queen screaming,
"Ah, put me down, you horrible monster!"
But her screams were suddenly silenced as the monster flew over the jump at the bottom of the hill, and the two of them disappeared into thin air. And once they realized they had succeeded, Elijah and Calvin cheered and gave each other a high five, knowing that they had saved their world from an unspeakable evil. They looked around and saw that the world was slowly returning to its former beauty. The trees were coming back to life, and the sky was clearing, and the snow was white and sparkling again. And as they walked back toward Elijah's house, they found Frosty laying on the ground, right where the Ice Queen had pushed him down. And they helped him back up and dusted him off, and since he had been such a nice snowman, they let him stay right there in Elijah's front yard. And Elijah said, "Just remember, Frosty, in our world, snowmen can't talk and move around like you can. So if you stay in our yard, you'll have to sit very still, just to make sure you don't scare any of our neighbors, okay?" "Can do," said Frosty. And the three of them knew that they had done their best and faced their fears, and they came out on top. "Thanks again for everything, Frosty," Elijah and Calvin said, turning to their friend. Frosty smiled. "Anytime, boys. That's what friends are for." And just as they were about to step inside, they heard a low, growling sound coming from behind them. They turned around and saw the monster that had just saved them from the Ice Queen, but its eyes were glowing with an eerie red light, and its demeanor had changed completely. "What's wrong with it?" Calvin said. Frosty stepped forward with his coal eyes wide with fear. "I don't know, but something is very, very wrong." As the monster started moving towards them, its roar grew louder and louder. Elijah, Calvin, and Frosty stood there frozen in fear, and they weren't sure what to do next. They heard a car zoom around the corner, and then its brakes screeched as the car came to a stop. "Come on, kids, get in the car!" It was Elijah's dad. He had come to rescue them. The three friends sprinted towards the car as the monster started chasing after them. They jumped in the back seat and slammed the door as Elijah's dad peeled out of the driveway, leaving the monster far behind. But as they drove away, they couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the once heroic monster that was so nice to them and saved them just a few minutes before. And how did it get back to their world in the first place? Was there another doorway somewhere that they didn't know about? And if the monster got back, did that mean the Ice Queen could come back too? The two boys were beginning to realize there was something much bigger going on here. And if they didn't get to the bottom of this, it would have consequences that would change their world forever. Elijah and Calvin knew they had to find out more, no matter what the cost. But that's a story for another day. Do you ever find yourself wondering when the next episode is going to come out for the Storyland podcast? I know they don't come out as much as we all want them to, but if you want to be the first to know about when the next story is going to drop, all you got to do is follow us on Instagram or Facebook, or just go to storyland.show, and you'll find links to all the different places online where you can listen and watch, and even leave a comment and make suggestions about other story ideas that you might have. Just go to storyland.show, or again, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram. Just search for Storyland, all one word, podcast. Storyland Podcast, and you should be able to find us there. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.